Sony's new 85 f1.4 GM Mark II lens is a very solid addition to their lineup that improves on its predecessor in every single way. And I think it's a great choice, especially if you're getting it to create videos. My only wish that I bet many people share is that Sony had somehow managed to make this an f1.2. Today I'm going to be reviewing this lens from the perspective of a wedding filmmaker and telling you if it's a good choice to buy if you film weddings or corporate or commercial videos, documentaries, etc. And if you've been looking for a lens that can film people that is very flattering and makes them look great, that's what this review is all about. Also, for the sake of ethics, I want you to know this video is not paid or sponsored by Sony, but they did loan me this lens so I can make this review, and I will sadly be shipping it back to them very soon. But that said, this video does have a sponsor, and it's my friends at Musicbed. I'll tell you more about them at the end of this video. In addition, because I want to help you out even more, I want you to know that I've put together a free workshop that's going to show you how to book your next wedding in 30 days or less, even if you have never filmed a wedding before. You can check it out for free at the link down in the video description. Talking the size and weight of this lens now, while it isn't as small and light as something like the 24mm GM, which is legendary for its small size and weight, this 85 Mark II is still 30% lighter and 13% smaller than the original, and I think this size is really important to consider because Sony knows what filmmakers want. They're very aware that people are asking for an 85 f1.2 lens, but they also know, as I'm sure that you do too, that there are things like the laws of physics, and an f1.2 lens is going to be larger and heavier than f1.4. And I know that while I and others have been asking for an f1.2, I think that their sales data is showing them that most people actually want lighter and smaller lenses, which I agree with too. I do want lighter and smaller lenses, especially as a wedding filmmaker. I don't want to be carting around a super heavy lens all day. And I have to say, I recently spent a lot of time using Nikon lenses with their launch of the Z6 III, and Nikon lenses are dramatically heavier than Sony, especially their f1.2 options. And while I appreciate that they offer them, wow, they are quite an arm workout. So, here's my theory. When it came time for Sony to release their two most recent 50mm lenses, I think that they got the order wrong. They released the 50mm f1.2 first, and then followed it up 2 years later with an f1.4 option. And I can't help but bet that if they'd done that backwards and released the f1.4 first, they probably would have made more sales because more people would have purchased the f1.4 version because it was lighter, smaller, and cheaper. Back to my theory then with 85 1.4. My hope is that Sony is also working on an 85 1.2, and I hope that in the next year or two we'll see it announced, and on top of that, I hope again that it is significantly lighter and smaller than the competition. We can also dream of it being cheaper, but come on, lenses are now hitting $3,000 plus at this point here. I wouldn't be surprised if it was like that. Anyways, back to the review of this 85 f1.4 lens in particular. I'm happy to tell you that Sony did not just make it lighter and smaller, they also greatly improved the internals as well. I don't know if you've used some of their earliest lenses, but while they were well built, they weren't exactly the fastest when it came to autofocus, and especially considering that Sony's now selling cameras that film 120 frames per second video pretty much across the board, not to mention 120 frames per second raw photos with the A9 III, I'm sure their engineers have a mandate that all of their new lenses must hit a certain autofocus speed minimum to keep up with their cameras. This means that the autofocus in this new 85 lens is significantly faster than the previous version, and in my testing I found it to be very accurate, just like any modern Sony lens. Image quality was also something that Sony told me they were very proud of with this lens, and I can see why. It's extremely sharp, and it takes me back to my love of their 135 f1.8 lens, which is easily one of the sharpest lenses that I've ever used. I have to say, this one competes with it quite well. The sharpness, especially at f1.4, helps your subject you're filming stand out from the frame even more, giving your image a really 3D effect, which is super cool, and one of the main reasons that I would consider an 85mm lens like this, if you want the people that you're filming to look really good. Sony also told me that they designed this lens to have a very minimal focus breathing, and in my testing, while I could see some, it wasn't bad, and you can always turn on their focus breathing compensation in any of their modern cameras, and also remove any focus breathing that you may see, but it's nice to see that even without the feature enabled, it still isn't bad. Otherwise, this lens comes with all the features and benefits that you'd expect from a Sony GM lens. You get 2 programmable buttons on the side, an autofocus manual focus switch, you've got a aperture range, everything with controls to make it clickless. And in a first for one of their prime lenses, this lens also includes an iris lock switch that you can flip to lock it so it does not switch between using the aperture control ring or the controls on your camera. It's a nice addition. And speaking of nice addition, it's also nice to see that the price for this second generation of lens has not increased over the previous version. You can go out and get this lens for the same price of $1,800 as the original 85 1.4, but I've also heard that Sony is going to be keeping that original version around, and it definitely may drop in price. That said though, considering all of the autofocus improvements, especially for video with this new lens, plus its sharpness, plus the lighter weight and smaller size, I think that the second gen version is the one that I would go with. And speaking of what I would go with, I need to tell you about the sponsor of this video, who I would definitely go with. This video is sponsored by my friends at Musicbed. Look, as filmmakers, we're always looking for the right music, right? Because the right song can really transform and elevate whatever you're watching, which is why I use and recommend Musicbed. Before I started using Musicbed, which was over a decade ago at this point, by the way, I always found myself struggling to find the right music for my videos, searching for hours or even days for the perfect song that matched the emotion and tone that I wanted. But then eventually having to settle for something that kind of matched what I was going for, but didn't quite nail it. Then I found Musicbed, and I started to find the songs that I was looking for dramatically faster. And with their new innovations and how you can search for music, like their AI-powered search by song feature, where you can just type the name of a song or artist and immediately find songs that sound like them, now I can find what I'm looking for in minutes, not hours or days. Musicbed has the largest curated collection of songs out there too, with over 60,000 tracks and counting. I don't struggle with finding songs anymore. I have a huge selection of powerful songs I can easily search for on Musicbed, and these songs have really connected with my audience and transformed the way that I find and use music in my video. So if you are a creator wanting to connect deeply with your audience through the songs that you use in your films, I highly recommend Musicbed. You can make the switch and start a free 14-day trial today at the link in my video description. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.